everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's webinar with Openn Negotiation. My name is Chloe Hayes from Investor Relations Consultancy Group Corporate Storytime. We are delighted to have Openn Negotiation's Managing Director, Peter Gibbons, and Executive Director and CTO, Duncan Anderson, with us today, who will be running us through an investor presentation of the Openn Negotiation story. Openn Negotiation, which has the ASX code OPN, is an ASX-listed property technology company which has developed proprietary software designed to improve transparency during property transactions via a trustworthy and efficient process to ensure the best possible outcomes for both buyers and sellers. Without any further ado, I'll hand over to Peter and Duncan, who will provide a more comprehensive overview of Openn Negotiation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chloe. And thanks to the team at Corporate Storytime. We really appreciate you putting this together for us. Also, thank you to all of you who've tuned in to watch. We really appreciate your time. Hopefully you'll like what you hear. The intention is we'll spend about 20 odd minutes going through the deck that was uploaded onto the ASX yesterday. We've taken out a few slides just for efficiency in terms of timing. So we'll do that for about 20 minutes, paint the picture for you of an update as to where we're at in Australia and New Zealand. And quite excitingly, we're in a position now that we can start filling in some of the detail around the North American expansion. So obviously disclaimers, we have to do that as part of legal recourse. You feel free to read those, but let's just jump straight into the story. For those who aren't too familiar with us, I'll provide very quickly a bit of a background to why Openn exists. So Openn started about 6 years ago, back in 2016-17. My founding partners are real estate agents, and we sat down really to work out what was the single largest problem in what probably is the single largest market in the world, so being real estate. So overwhelmingly, their response was, it's about the lack of transparency in the sales process. If you think of any other markets around the world, they're all pretty much transparent, except for real estate. So what does transparency mean in that instance? Well, effectively, it's about, and if I can give an example, and I can't see you all, but you'll probably be nodding because most of us have been in this situation. It's around when you're looking to purchase a property and you say to the agent, I like the property, how much do I have to pay? The response to that is generally two things. Look, I can't tell you. And the other one is, but I've got a few offers over here. Now, immediately that lack of transparency creates a lack of trust. It also puts the buyer in a position where they're feeling very uncomfortable because they don't know where to pitch their offer. Generally ends up in one or two places. It's either, congratulations, you've purchased the property. You're immediately thinking, have I paid too much? Where was the bid below me? I'm really not sure where I stood. Again, uncomfortable. Or secondly, and probably worse, is when the call comes back, look, I'm sorry you missed out. The property went for $800,000. And the response is, look, I would have paid that, or I would have paid more. Like that, you've got a buyer who's walking away unhappy and unhappy with the agent, and a seller who's left money on the table. So nobody wins, including the agent, seller, buyer in that circumstance. So that's the problem we sought to solve. And we solved it in a very unique way through technology. Openn is a platform that allows that transparency that people have been looking for. So that includes very much so around the price transparency. So people know what they need to put in as an offer to secure the property. Now, creating that competitive tension leads to optimal pricing incomes, because if you don't see value, you don't increasing the price. If you do see value, of course, you keep going. Now, where it generally has been ending up, and this is, as I say, this isn't a startup, we've been going for 6 years now, ends up in a situation where people are saying, look, okay, I paid a full price, but I could see someone was only $1,000 behind me. I had social proof that I haven't overpaid for this property. And that's what's quite unique about the platform, and has been recognised both nationally and internationally, is around that depth of market data that is being captured through the platform, which is incredibly exciting, and we'll speak to that in a moment. We listed in July. We pulled together a very strong board, including 2 non-executive directors, Wayne Zekulich, who comes from a very, very strong corporate investment banking background, and Danielle Lee, very respected lawyer, ex-ASX, giving us that very strong governance and compliance. We're very clean as a company. There's no debt in the company. We're well funded, strong shareholder base, and we're well positioned for growth. We announced, I think, in the last few weeks, a restructure of the business. I'm still responsible for the overall business, but this was a very important strategic move because the opportunity that we're about to speak to in United States and Canada, we'll just refer to as North America, is really quite profound. So our previous COO in Australia, New Zealand, Sean Adamite, was elevated based on his exceptional work in the last 5 years to CEO of the Australian New Zealand business. And what that's allowed us to do is for Duncan, our CTO and President of our North American operations, and myself to really focus our energies on what is an enormous opportunity. Through this process of restructuring, we've also managed to secure some very strong senior executives on the East Coast. So James Fitzgerald's joined us. James was the ex-head of product at the Domain Group. We've got others that are joining us or in the process of joining us to really give us that bench strength to maintain that focus on Australia and New Zealand, keep that going exceptionally strong. And I can move into slides now that will indicate that the success in Australia is growing at a rate of knots. At the time of our listing, we essentially created 4 pillars to judge us by. The first of those was we're out to increase market share. We wanted to get to market approximately 5% of the Australian addressable market by June 2024. We're well on the way for that. In fact, we're well and truly in excess of what our anticipated growth rate was. Our annual growth since inception is over 200% per annum. Our rate of agents coming on, there's about 35,000 agents in Australia. That number, we're at about 15% of the market, which is a great result, but is also very positive. Means there's 85% of agents that we've got to access. We said we'd be looking to leverage partners as our go-to-market strategy. We've had enormous success there. Partnerships with the likes of groups you'll probably know, such as Professionals, Remax, First National. And we did our first integration partnership with CoreLogic, a New York Stock Exchange listed group, which has been very exciting. We continue to look to ways to integrate with other parties, not only in a partnership basis, but also an integration of technology. In relation to technology, our vision has expanded in relation to what the platform can actually do. So we started with Openn Negotiation, exceptional, transparent product. Some agents said to us, look, we love Openn Negotiation, but some of the properties we use, we prefer to use a private treaty offering. So we've created that in the form of Open Offers. Very much mirrors their traditional process, just adds a seamless way of them to manage multiple offers and increase the transparency of the process. We've just released Open Tenders. A number of commercial and rural agents said we tend to run a tender process. We've mirrored that. So essentially it becomes the platform that no matter what process an agent uses, they can use the Open platform and keep it running all through the one seamless space. International expansion, I won't rain on Duncan's parade. This is a very, very exciting opportunity for us. It's becoming very real. I've just come back recently from a 12-state tour, speaking with potential partners there, and we'll move into greater depth in that in a moment. So back to Australia, New Zealand, how are we going? We're going exceptionally well. This is a year-on-year comparison. So if you look at any month, and obviously real estate seasonal, but if you look at that growth in any month, you'll see every year we're going from strength to strength. As I say, since inception, we're at over 200% year-on-year growth, and that hasn't slowed down. The slowest months are basically comparable to the best months of the previous year, so we're very happy with the way that's going. In terms of users, we're pushing up to 100,000 users. So a user is somebody who has registered on the platform. They could be a buyer, obviously a seller, agent, and we've got an observer platform, which is a great lead generating tool for the agent. So if somebody's interested in a property, and quite often somebody who's looking to sell their own property, they can come and observe parts of the transaction and see how the platform works. This is probably a great slide to summarise how Australia and New Zealand's going. So it's comparing where we were 12 months ago to where we are today. And if you can think of it this way, it took us sort of the 4 or 5 years to get to February 2021. Got us to 50-odd thousand registered users. We're now at almost 100. We had 22-odd thousand qualified buyers over that 4 or 5 years. In a year's time, we're almost at 52,000. I won't read out all the stats for you. You can see them there for yourself. But probably for me, the most exciting one is around that properties sold through the platform. So 4 to 5 years to get to 1.69 million. 12 months later, we're at almost 4.5 billion. So they are very significant numbers. This one, again, is an exciting slide for me. I said we started in Western Australia, have had very strong growth here, but it's not a West Australian story. It's truly a national and becoming international story. So if you'd asked us sort of 12, 18 months ago, that West Australian piece of the upload pie would have been north of 50%, but the big markets are in the east. And you can certainly see there, New South Wales, the largest market in the country, is now becoming our dominant market. So we're getting that traction that we were looking for and hoping for. I mentioned key partnerships. I've alluded to some of the strategic partnerships already. We're all about integration to get to the market. So you'll see there are a number of names, that's many of them that you will know that we've integrated with. If I can draw your attention to the top right-hand corner, this is really important. So REACH is the accelerator program of the National Association of Realtors. That's the group in the United States that's the institute for agents in the United States. About 1.5 million agents are members of that institute, if you compare that to 35,000 agents in all of Australia. They asked us, they invested into Openn in the IPO, but what they also did is they asked us into the Australian REACH Accelerator. Some 6 or so months ago, we got a call from them inviting us into their Canadian program. Now, we're the first technology they've invested in. They invest and have these accelerators all around the world. We're the first technology that they've invited into 2 accelerator programs. And that the reasons for that will become apparent as we move on to the North American story. I mentioned integrations. In Australia and New Zealand, CRMs are a very important part of the agent process, and we're all about making ourselves as seamless and easy to use and frictionless for the agent as possible. So we're integrating with most of the major CRMs so that it becomes a seamless experience for the agent as they go through their transactional process. I mentioned we're expanding the vision of Openn. So Openn Negotiation was our first cab off the rank, if you like. Openn Offers has been fantastic for us. So that was released a few months ago. It's already got to 30% of our uploads, which is quite exceptional. We released it the first 3 months, it was free to agents to get them exposed to it. We then started charging for it, and there's been no drop off. So great result. Open tenders, open access, getting released now. Again, it's all about offering all the solutions that agents are looking for. So look, that's the Australian-New Zealand story. Still very much a focus for us. We've got an exceptional senior executive focusing on that sector for us. But now we'll go on to talk about what, as I say, we probably haven't been able to explain this story because we've spent 9 months really shoring it up. But I'll hand over to Duncan to allude to where we're going in North America.
Thanks, Gibbo. So one thing we need to understand is that the size of the opportunity in North America is massive. Relative to Australia, it is profoundly greater than all of Australia and New Zealand put together. Obviously, most of you will know that, but just to give you some basic numbers to put this into perspective, Across Australia, there are 35,000 active real estate agents. There's approximately 1.5 million in the United States and another 120,000 in Canada. They are members of the peak body in their respective countries. There's another 500,000 agents who are not members of the National Association of Realtors in the United States. So just from an agent perspective, people in the ground in the industry, the difference is enormous. In terms of the number of properties sold across Australia, there's approximately 500,000 properties sold every year. In the United States alone, there's 6.5 million. And in Canada last year, that number actually was closer to 600,000. So Canada's a similar size economically to Australia. The United States is profoundly greater, as you all know. But why we are heading into that marketplace has a lot more to do with influences on the ground in North America and the relationship we have with the National Association of Realtors. So Peter mentioned the REACH Accelerator program. That program is designed by the National Association of Realtors and their venture arm, Second Century Ventures, to identify PropTech around the world that would be suitable for their home market. The reason they brought us into the Canadian Accelerator has a lot to do with movements on the ground related to consumer rights in real estate. So historically, buying practices or real estate transaction practices are very opaque. So most of you that have purchased a property through the offer and acceptance process will know that you're not dealing with an overly transparent experience. As a consequence of that, several bad practices have led to actions taken by the Department of Justice in the US, their equivalent in Canada, and in the last election campaign, federal election campaign in Canada, Trudeau's party ran on a Home Buyers Bill of Rights platform that included the end to opaque practices, very specifically the end of what they call blind bidding. In addition to that, what we've identified is that through our pilot programs is that, yes, whilst Openn solves that transparency issue, there is another big brewing problem in the industry in both Canada and the United States, and it relates to human bias. So for instance, if you have a skin pigment or a political persuasion or a sexual orientation that's different to most people in your neighbourhood, and you put an offer in on a property and you don't get it, how do you know that your offer was even considered? And this particular issue around human bias is creating significant issues for the justice system and the regulatory systems in both the US and Canada. So transparency on the one side, equality on the other side, and the confluence of those two drivers is creating enormous headaches for agents on the ground, because every time they receive an offer, the level of transaction documentation they need to run through is starting to grow and grow. It's becoming a real productivity issue for the industry. The way Openn is designed, we solve all three of those problems. So the reason why we went to the accelerator in Canada, the reason why we're being drawn into the United States, is the industry is starting to see that Openn has the ability to address a real issue that has been pushed down on them from above, and also being driven by the millennials who demand transparency from below. So as a consequence of that, we are starting to build relationships with key channels to market across the US and Canada. The vast body of the work we've done over the last 6 months is really trying to understand, okay, we know we've got a product that meets a need. We know that we have a product that has potentially rapid uptake in both those markets. We are very confident in our underlying technology to handle scale, but what we need to do is make sure that we build a business model that is sustainable at scale. So in order to do that, traditionally there's a couple of key points. The first one is around pricing, and the second one is around partnering with channels to market or partnering with organisations who are already have mature market access. In the US, there's a couple of very key organisations that have that capability. The first one is what is called an MLS. It's a multiple listing service. The reason for their existence is that across most states in the United States, you will have on any given real estate transaction a listing agent and a buying agent. And the rules, the regulations around that essentially require that each buyer's agent must have equal access to a given listing in their area. And so the MLS, their responsibility is to take listings and then from listing agents and distribute them equally and fairly to all buying agents in that area. As a consequence, they're kind of a semi-regulatory body. Some of them operate for profit, some of them operate non-profit, but they are well kitted to drive new technologies into their particular jurisdiction. So we are working with MLSs to build relationships with them to understand how they can help us not only access the market, but support our product in the market to reduce our overall need to provide that capacity. The second area is working with brokers. So I think we've already announced to the market that we are running 2 pilot programs in Massachusetts and Connecticut right now with some brokers. One of them is a very large broker. The other one is a smaller one. That's designed very specifically to get all ends of the spectrum in feedback back to us. The third area, not on this slide, but the third area is technology providers into those segments. So these might be, if you walk through the home buyer's journey, you will have those organisations that list properties or display properties. So the equivalent here would be a realestate.com or a domain, through to transaction management systems. The equivalent here in Australia is a CRM. But in the United States, some of those are quite large. What we do is we fit in between those 2 technologies. We solve a particular problem around digital offer management. And so our game plan here is to build partnerships where we integrate into those other major players. We walked through those key drivers. I'm not going to go through with those again, other than to say that there is one other piece of the puzzle here that is consistent feedback from the pilots we're running and the relationships we're building with MLS groups in particular, and that is our data is unique and will deliver enormous value back to the industry. So what's our pricing model? In Australia, we currently charge per transaction. So the Australian real estate model is a little bit different. If you buy a property here in Australia, if you sell a property here in Australia, I'm sure many of you have experienced it. The agent will say to you, here is your marketing budget, and my commission is above and beyond that. Your marketing budget will cover the sign out the front, advertising in the local newspaper, advertising on domain and realestate.com, and also placing your property on Openn for price discovery. So in Australia, we charge per transaction, and that charge is in fact passed on to the vendor of the property. But in the United States and Canada, there's really no concept of this vendor paid advertising. The costs of advertising or marketing a property come out of the agent's commission. And so PropTech space there typically charges the agent and typically does that under a subscription model. So we've done a fair bit of work to analyse the types of models that drive the fastest route to penetration up to 25–30% in each jurisdiction. And those models typically run somewhere between $20 and $100 per month per agent. And why does that make sense for us to charge in that range? It does because agents typically spend somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000 a year on PropTech solutions like this. So fitting within that range is something we're quietly confident can drive market penetration. It's something that we know the market is prepared to pay. But at the back end for us, the real value opportunity in North America is data. Your pathway to monetize that data is clear to us. We have in fact employed our key executives with that background, and we've employed key consultants working on our go-to-market strategy with that background. So typically you would find with our depth of market data, you won't see revenue kicking in for a couple of years until you've gained statistical significance in the market. But your revenue opportunity there will hopefully range from somewhere between $100 per property and $1,000 per property over the long term. All right. How do we go from, we now understand we solve a problem, we now understand what our market access strategy needs to be, what our pricing strategy needs to be, how do we execute this? The key things to be looking for to understand where we are on that journey is, have we de-risked market access? So the first thing you want to be looking for is, have we developed partnerships with MLSs that can drive market penetration? So the journey there with an MLS or an industry body will start with a beta. Sorry, it will start with a pilot. It'll move to a beta, then it'll move to live transactions. If you see us generating partnerships that are at pilot level, you know we've made a major step towards de-risking market access for that particular jurisdiction. If you see us running a beta, you know that is now a very tangible, low risk opportunity to access that market. If you see live transactions, it means we're on our way. So we are fairly confident there's a diligent, methodical process we need to follow. We are organising the resources to execute on all that process. We are organising our partners to help us get there as quickly as possible. This slide is really showing what I just said in perspective. If you're looking at the number of real estate agents, and based on our subscription modelling in the US, initially it'll be heavily driven by number of agents subscribing. In the latter half of the next 5 years, it'll be that revenue model will be driven really by the data revenue from property uploads. But in Australia, if we look at the MLSs that we're talking to, most of them are actually bigger. Their membership base is bigger than all of Australia. So just one of these might be a significant portion of the Australian market. A couple of these together, and you can start to see how we can grow value very, very quickly in the US and also Canada. Right, what's our timetable? We essentially spent most of last year working through piloting with a couple of key brokers, really to understand what our value proposition is, making sure that our product design was localized for the markets in the US and Canada. We have in fact rolled out sandbox environments that are localized. We'll go through another couple of rounds of those before we can commercially launch. But we are ready now to begin the process of deeper dives with large MLSs. Our expectation currently is that we are on track for a commercial launch in at least one market towards the end of the first half of this calendar year.
Yeah, look, as you can see, we've already gone over time. You can probably see we could talk about this forever. It's a very exciting opportunity for us, but we want to give you a chance to call your brokers. So we might throw back to you, Chloe, if we've got any questions.
Thanks, Peter and Duncan, for a great presentation. It's clear the business is on an incredibly exciting path. Yes, we've had some questions come through from the audience, so let's move on to those. Firstly, how is the US patents assisting the entry into the North American markets?
Let me just get rid of what's on my screen at the moment. Okay, so we have a patent that is approved in the United States. It is approved only in the United States. What that patent says is that it's over the process of Openn, where perhaps the best way of describing this, if you've used eBay before, it's an online auction system. You as a buyer compete against other buyers for a particular item. It's that patenting something like that is very difficult because it already exists. What Openn has done that's very different and unique is it's inserted a real estate agent into the middle of the process. And the real estate agent essentially facilitates that negotiation or that process. So the real estate agent will qualify the buyer. They'll understand that that buyer has the capacity to pay, that they're a real person, so on and so forth. And what that means is every other buyer in the process knows they're competing against other legitimate people. So that particular piece of the puzzle happens to be unique. We developed that back in 2016, and up until that particular point, there were no technologies around that did that. And because we submitted the patent back in 2016, that is our priority date for that patent. And in the United States, our patent basically covers the concept where an online auction for real estate or an online sales process for real estate can be held transparently and facilitated by an agent. How does that help us? Well, you've got some 800-pound gorillas in the market like Zillow and Compass. They probably have the balance sheet and the wherewithal to pour through a patent, figure out where the I's need to be or can be dotted differently or the T's crossed differently and work their way around it. That's not really why the patent's important to us. The patent's more important to us because some of the mid-tier players who we can integrate and partner with would look at that patent. It becomes a roadblock or an obstacle to market entry. They're better off partnering with us than developing a competitive solution.
Next question. Have you considered a TV advertising campaign to inform the public of the benefits of using Openn over traditional methods of sale?
Yes, look, that is part of the particularly Australia-New Zealand process at the moment. So if you think of it, we're a B2B in the first instance. So our foot soldiers, our partners are the real estate agents. We need them to become qualified and understand the Openn process. We've predominantly done that now. And now you're exactly right. It's about getting the message out to the wider audience, the sellers and buyers, so that, and we're already starting to see it. We're getting calls from people saying, I love the Openn process. Could you put me in touch with an agent who sells this way? So we are looking, we've had enormous success in a number of regional areas. So it's again, that beta testing concept that we do. So we are looking at advertising campaigns, radio, television, etc., as part of a blend of how we get to the market. Based on that feedback, we'll likely go wider to larger audiences across the country.
Thanks. Next question. Can you describe the data opportunity a little further? Could this be the ultimate prize for Openn?
Yes is the basic answer to that question. So what Openn has is what we call depth of market data. So not only do we understand the price the property is sold for, we understand how much support was there in the market for that sale price. So we understand how many buyers there were that put offers in, where each buyer pulled out. So how far away from, when you look at that at an aggregate level, we can identify how many buyers are there within X% of the final sale price. And those sort of indicators allow a number of different analytics to occur that simply don't exist today. So one of them is if you're a property developer or you're in local council and you're looking at zoning decisions, one of the things you want to know is what is the potential demand out there at different price points for different quality of accommodation. And an example might be, we sat down with Todd Property in New Zealand and walked through their process for what they do when they build a massive apartment complex. And if they're running a, say, $150 million build, they conduct a survey that costs them several $1 million to understand how many potential buyers there are at 1.2 million versus 1.1 versus 900,000. And from that, they allocate apartment quality in that construction bill. What they've told us is the sort of data we have is real time, whereas their surveys are out of date by the time they get to FID on those construction projects. Our data is based on people that have a legitimate, qualified propensity to buy. So they're really in the market to buy something. So as a consequence of that, we know that there is a significant opportunity to bundle up our data and sell it as subscription to people like property developers, local councils making zoning decisions, etc. But in addition to that, there are financial institutions, insurance companies. There are tens of thousands of these types of fund organisations in North America, Australia and elsewhere who would like to subscribe to data that will tell them at an aggregate level where underlying trends are in the real estate sector that they can't see just from a lag indicator like median price. And that to us is really where the big value opportunity is. But you won't take advantage of that until you hit statistical significance. So our game plan is penetrate the market, grow as rapidly as we can, then leverage the value in that data.
Perfect. The next question is, are your systems and infrastructure ready for a fast adoption of Openn's tech in the huge markets you describe in North America? And can Openn keep up if the North American market booms?
Yeah, the technology-wise, we are very confident. The reason we're taking our time on the second part of that question for the United States is to make sure our business model is equally as scalable. So I think I did talk a little bit about that during the presentation, but just from a tech standpoint, what we've done under the hood is very sophisticated. It's designed for scale and it's designed for security. So for instance, we have this will bore most people, but we have a stateless server. We deploy that across a load balance framework. It's on an AWS infrastructure platform. What that really means for the layperson is that as demand grows, the system automatically spins up new servers. No humans are involved in that particular process. As demand declines, so overnight, for instance, those servers cut back. So from a cost standpoint, it's really efficient. If a bad actor managed to break through our levels of security and isolate a server for a denial of service attack, we just isolate that server, other servers spin up, no one knows. So we have, in fact, simulated 100% market share across Australia and New Zealand. We did that through a couple of exercises last year, and it was at that particular point where we knew we had the capacity to scale technically across North America, simply because we knew we could handle this market very efficiently.
And this is our final question. How is Openn's open tenders rollout going? Is there any potential for a different pricing model for commercial property?
Look, really interesting question, and not only here, obviously, for Australia and New Zealand, but quite profound for North America as well. Tenders has literally just been released, already receiving very positive feedback. We build these new platforms, these new modules, based on feedback from agents directly. So we build what they want. We're already seeing that it is actually achieving exactly what they want and very much mirroring their current process. But the commercial one is exceptionally interesting. There is no one playing in the commercial space around any form of price transparency, and we've already effectively built most of it. So that's another area of focus for us, is to build out that commercial module. It's a fascinating question about which pricing model you would use there. We certainly wouldn't be looking to charge $300 to $500 to be selling a $500 million New York office building. So it would likely be a percentage model, ideally, where it may be a very minor percentage of what is a very large transaction sum. But again, hopefully you're seeing we don't just rush into areas. We take a deep dive, we fully understand it, we do our due diligence. And that's one of the exciting opportunities in commercial property we've got ahead of us.
One question we see that just came through, the question is the US operation owned under Openn ASX listed entity? The answer to that is yes, it's a 100% subsidiary.
Well, that seems to complete our webinar today. Thanks again to Peter and Duncan and to all of the attendees who tuned in. We will make a recording of this webinar available via Openn Negotiations and Corporate Storytime's digital platforms for those who couldn't make it today and would like to rewatch today's webinar. Thanks everyone for attending and have a good day.
Thanks very much.